Now, joining me now, security expert Eldred de Klerk has been watching very carefully what's coming out of that ad hoc committee. Eldred, good to have you. Thank you very much for your time. Before we get to some of the substantial issues that the minister is raising, let's talk about whether the committee is correct in curtailing, I suppose, his time and space to over-expand on some of these issues that he wants to expand on. He feels that he should have been given a little bit more space, but because of time, the parliamentarians said, no, we gave you 2 days, must wrap up this testimony now.
Well, one would think that 2 days would be enough. I think there's 2 problems with the process. One, the process is being held in English. I have a profound reaction to the fact that we need to let folks speak in the vernacular. I'm not saying that the minister or anybody else is not proficient in English. Most of the time, we think in one language and speak in another. Most of our local languages are a lot more descriptive. There is no sexy little one-word concepts for what we need to explain. The second thing is I would have wanted the evidence leaders and the legal counsel for those providing testimony to be a little bit more on point in terms of where are we going with a particular set of inquiry and set of questions to make sure that somebody is a little bit more prepared. Yes, there may be things that come from that, but this is the script, not the script, but this is the direction that we're taking. The third thing is, I think that's problematic to me, is the fact that we don't have seemingly, if we simply had graphs that gave a chronology, sort of like on-screen summary of this is where it happened, these are the meetings that happened, because we keep coming back. In what month was it? On what date was it? If we had summaries, live summaries almost, researchers sitting there, recording what they see, and are able to say, we've covered this, this is the agreements we already agreed on, can we now move on from there? So that it does, and I hope the Madlanga Commission takes note, because then it becomes more of an inquisitorial exploration of what is probable, what is plausible, and what ultimately will amount to the truth. The final thing I would like to think is that the senior counsel or the evidence leaders understand the dynamics of policing. They understand how the Board of Commissioners work. They understand, at least in their own mind, how processes work, what the culture is like, how decisions are made, so that they don't have to keep going over stuff that I and others who may have a rudimentary understanding of all this have to keep revisiting.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, because, I mean, at least the bit that I watched earlier today, up until they broke at about 2 o'clock, the evidence leader at pains to want to establish the fact that you did not consult. Like, it almost took him 2 hours to want to get the minister to say you did not consult with your colleagues. Yet the minister keeps answering and saying, legally, in terms of legislation, I have no obligation to do so, even though there would have been meetings where this matter would have been raised. But we didn't have a special meeting, sitting to say we are disbanding the political killings task team.
Well, it seems like the minister is saying 2 things. Essentially saying, like you rightfully said, one, I understood that I didn't have a legal obligation. It is then later in this cross-examination that the evidence leader suggests that in terms of fair and due process, or fair process in administrative justice, consultation is primary. Even if there is executive authority that has to be exercised, you still have to give plausible and reasonable reasons, explanation as to why you took an executive decision. He could have led with that. Simple. He could have led with that. And then the minister could have said, well, I took an executive decision. I did have meetings, and in these meetings, I tested certain things. I tested the chief financial officer's findings. I tested the successes of the task team. And all of these, and I looked at the evidence that there was, I looked at what I was given from ordinary citizens, and I took a decision after much deliberation and contemplation that the task team should be disestablished. Could have been very simple. We need to learn to cut through the crap. This whole circus that we're going through is unnecessary. It's a public spectacle, I think, that leads to more confusion And it undermines the integrity of both the process and the minister, because now the minister looks like he was evasive, like he couldn't answer the questions. And all he really wanted to do was explain. And maybe we should just say, I'll ask you one question. You tell us the story. If there's anything I'm not clear about, I will ask it.
Yeah.
Done.
Let's talk about that as well. The fact that the minister says, I don't want it to be misunderstood in any way, unequivocally. I take full responsibility of these directives. They come from me, except, of course, my advisor, Advocate Pikoli, who would have been with me in making the decision. He even goes on to say, yes, it might have been in December, but I was very sober in writing that letter and giving those directives. And then later on, towards the end, he says, yeah, then I did brief the president on it, and he agreed, even though he says, I mean, the briefing could have been a thing of 5 minutes where I just told the president, this is what I'm going to do. And the president said, yeah, well, fine. Is the minister correct in his understanding that that is neither here nor there, that ultimately the decision for the directives will solely lie on him and will not, in a sense, implicate the president?
Well, I think that was definitely his understanding. And I think here again, you summed it up well, because if the president said, well, okay, fine, now I understand, that tacit consent to the minister may amount to agreement. If I don't question, if I don't direct otherwise, and I say, fine, I understand, that tacit consent is go ahead and do what you want to do. The more telling thing for me is not that the president agreed this way or that way, is what was the president's expectation when he set up the interministerial committee under the chair of the Minister of Police? Did he want to get debriefings, or did he simply say, you are now tasked and I hand over this responsibility and you go and do it? So that when you come back to me, it's more out of courtesy, and all I want to really see are results. That is one thing that I think is also not clear.
He says in the directives he would have left space for engagement. He says, like in any job situation, your superior can put you in a very uncomfortable position at times, but it's work. That's what happens in work. And his expectation was that if the police commissioner had any issues with that directive, there would have been a chance that Minmeko, I think another date on the 20th, where he says, you can come and engage me on these issues. He says, look, I issued the directive with the view that we'll have an opportunity to engage at a later stage around these issues.
Absolutely. And even though he issued the directive on New Year's Eve, the National Commissioner had a period of time, I think until the 20th of January, and he was getting back on the 21st. I forget what the dates are. There's too many of them at this time, to actually come with a written response, some sort of briefing document. So that kind of poo-poos in a little way, if I could use that, the idea of immediacy. Because I understood that, and one way of understanding that, and I'm not making the case for the minister, was simply to say, I need you to look at this with immediate effect. Give effect to it. See how this can be done, and let's have a conversation about it. Now, that is what the minister is essentially saying. The project leader went to the portfolio committee, didn't contradict any of that. All the project leader said was, this is how we're going to go about it. This is where we're handing over the dockets to, and this is an envisaged timeline. Why didn't it end there? Why are we sitting here today? And it's because the minister makes the further point that the context of these relationships, not just with the senior management of the or leadership of the South African Police Service, but with particular individuals who took exception to the fact that the minister dared, and I'm going to use those words deliberately, to look towards disestablishing the PKTT. They expressed their anger, and even on July 6th, Mkhwanazi said to all of us as a country, essentially, and I paraphrase him and he can say otherwise, you don't want to mess with people that know things because they can bring this country down, essentially, as what I left with his message. So when the minister said to me, or says to all of us, during this briefing, that there was anger, but this anger also leads to this what he already says is a culture within the South African Police Service of recrimination and acting against others who you regard as a threat. Yeah. So we need to take the context in which the minister was making this decision and in which he found himself and strained relationships that didn't allow maybe for these things to be amicably resolved over time.
Let's talk about that context and whether or not it puts the minister, I suppose, in any better light. The fact that he received an SMS in April from the Lieutenant General, Provincial Commission of KwaZulu-Natal saying, look, I hear this situation that is going on. Can you call a meeting between Brown Mkhotsi, the police commissioner, and so on and so forth, because this thing could certainly affect the police operations, but also affect me and my family. And the minister says, well, I did not respond to that, firstly, because I don't know what it is structure that he says I must assemble. What would be the context of that meeting? But also I had the view that I'll speak to him about these issues that have got to do with his family. But then he gives us context. He says, but earlier in January, then I heard from my chief of staff that this man is very angry and he's threatening a fight back. And so he says, I would have suspended, I suppose, interaction at that particular point to watch and observe this fight back.
I think that's a lack of public leadership. I think it's a missed opportunity. And, you know, and I wouldn't want that, me saying that, point to the character of the minister. But for me, you got to be able to have difficult and hard conversations in which you listen and you engage, and you may hear things that you don't want to hear. And you also understand how your decisions impact others and the lives of others. So I think the minister missed an opportunity to go and have a one-on-one, and he should have done it almost immediately. If I was ever in a position to advise him or advise a minister, as to say, this is an essential cog in your wheel. It's a respected, credible member of your team. Go and have a coffee. Go and listen. Don't have to do anything. Don't have to promise anything. You simply go listen. And that lost opportunity, I think, adds fuel to the fire, and it does nothing to quell what was already a tense contextual situation or a conflictual situation in which the minister found himself.
Eldred, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. Security expert Eldred de Klerk there, following the second day appearance of the Minister on special leave. That's Minister Senzo Mchunu.